Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. Today in this video, we will be learning a new and a very important concept in the coding language called objects, and we will be specifically working with strings. So let's get started. All right, so first things first, make sure that you've already remixed your project and named it. So we're going to start off by first trying to understand what objects are, right? So let's take this as an example. Let message, I've created basically a variable, and I am in this one giving it some kind of data to store, right? So this, in this case, this is basically an object, and specifically so a string object. So what exactly is a string? So a string is basically a data type that can store a lot of different characters. Usually it is used to represent textual data. So if you can see, I've already put here some kind of text inside, and it can include text along with numbers and spaces. So if you can notice, like here, there's a space, some exclamation mark. If I say, hello there to you too, it would also work, right? Because it's still different than, let's say, what we have been working previously before, where I would say let x is 10, right? So the difference is this is basically a variable which is holding only, first of all, the data type is an integer, which is a whole number, and the value it's holding is one data point, right? However, when it comes to an object, it is holding a much more complex set of data, right? So you can see that there are so many characters inside it. Also, I can kind of like, because it's a text, we have to make sure that it is included in a single or a double quote as well. So if you want, we can kind of go to our here to our console, and we can try and think about what that looks like. So I've just cleared it up. Let me first go back to my sketch so that it kind of makes sense. So what we can see here is if we want to notice, if I put here as message, this is slightly different from any other kind of objects that we will use moving forward. Let's say if we are working with images or sound, etc., that would be different. But in strings, it's kind of easier because it's literally text, so it can give us an output like that. However, talking about the syntax of an object, we will be using a lot of this dot structure. So what that means is that object has some kind of associated properties and methods attached to it. And what do I mean when I say properties and methods is that in this case, you can already see length, and there are like really a long, list of things that are kind of popping up. Length in this case is basically a property. That means that this is an attribute. So what we are asking here is, tell me the length of this message. So the dot structure, what it does, it's really going to point to the specific object and say, okay, tell me the length of this object, right? So in this case, since including all the letters and characters, it's saying that those are 21. And then apart from properties, where length is a property, there is something called method. So method are basically just like functions, but they are specifically of an object. So if you can see char add, this is basically a function with the parentheses, as you can see. If I put any kind of index number, right, it's asking for the position. So by default, it's kind of showing me the 0 index, which is h as the first character at index 0. But if I say 5, it's a space, maybe I should say 6, it's T, right? So on and so forth. If I say 8, it's an E, etc., etc. And there's another one. There are quite a bunch of them. Maybe we can look at this substring. So what it does is, it's also telling you what kind of parameters it's expecting, the start and an end. You know how we give in a random function, we can set either a range of things. We can do so here as well. So if I say, sorry, 30, between 3 and let's say 9, so it's going to output all the characters that are within the index 3 and 9. So in this case, it's LO space THE, right? So that's what it's kind of showing us. So we're going to try and make use of some of these properties and methods. I'm going to skip this for now. And if you want to know a little bit more, you can always go back here and come back to this website called W3 Schools. Strings is basically a bigger JavaScript concept, so it may not be, it's not really included in P5 reference library, so it's a good idea to kind of track it here. If you want to see, there are certain properties which are shown here along with the description of what they are, and then there are a bunch of methods which are attached to it as well. So you have a lot of flexibility to kind of play around with the functions, okay? So moving back, what we can see is, let's say if we, I'm gonna make this shorter for now, it doesn't matter, but let's keep it a bit simple. Starting with our background function, let's make it black, and then use this as white, okay? And then we are going to call the function, really the text function basically, so that we can see whatever we have put here as the string object to display on our canvas, right? So text function, again, it expects a string and then the X and Y position of the string as well. So in this case, our string is basically message, right? Where we have stored all the characters. And then let's put it in the middle of our canvas for now. So you can see it has kind of started to, we can kind of see it here. Since it's a bit small, we can add a few more things where we can change the size. Too big? Maybe we can go a bit 50 for now. Okay, one more thing that if you can see, when we start writing, we start to write this text as well. That also starts, like, you know how the rectangle is, so it's on the top left corner. So you know how we can kind of change the mode in our ellipse mode and rect mode, we can do the same for text as well, but it's called text align function. And within that, we can literally say center, right? So now you can see that how it has shifted. All right, so this kind of works for now. What we can see is that there is some kind of text that has appeared, whatever we had already put in our object, strings, right? What more can we kind of do with it? Maybe let's try and play around if we can add some kind of interactivity to it. So let's say, what if we kind of map our mouse's position, mouse's X position from 0 all the way to the width of the canvas, and make sure that only one character at a time appears, right? So what we can do here is that we kind of know that we are mapping. So let's call it an index. So let index be mapped. In this case, what we will do here, what exactly are we mapping, right? We are mapping our mouse's X position, right? From 0 all the way to width. And then we are mapping it to basically this string object, right? So if you can see all the characters which are inside, so what we will do is say message dot length. We're going to make use of the property of this object. So we don't have to worry about it each time, whatever the length is, even if the sentence here becomes longer, that's fine. And then what we can do here is where this is, we can actually attach the method, and let's use the index inside. So now if you see that, you can already see the first letter, which is at index 0, as long as my mouse is on the left side. And while I move it all the way to the maximum of the canvas size, we can see one character appearing, each character appearing one at a time, right? So that's one way to kind of go about it. Let's see what else can we do. So we are going to just keep on playing around with this a little bit more and see how we can work with this object string, right? So I'm going to let's try to actually display this whole sentence and try to make it in a more circular format. And how can we kind of go about it? So first of all, we know that we're going to be using think this is we're going to be combining a few of the concepts that we have learned previously in our video as well. So think about it like the clock format. So we will be using a lot of transformation. We're going to start off with our very good friend, which is our for loop, right? So that's what we will start off with. And then within this function, let's say we are going to create let I. Okay, let I is 0, I is less than message.length in this case. Okay, as long as it's less than the message's length, you're going to keep on increasing. And what I will do here for now is I'm going to move it inside the for loop. Okay. And let's just format it a little. Okay, so that is there, but we need to do something more to it. And what else can we kind of do it? So first of all, when we want this to appear here, of course, it's kind of a bit broken at this point in time. Okay, I think I'll have to refresh my page. This is when the glitches. Okay. So right now, what you can see here in this broken format is it's not so much broken, but the thing is that you see all of the text basically overlaid on top of each other, right? All of the characters are there. So they're still happening one at a time instead of being displayed from left to right, right? Like how it is in a sentence, because that's what we've asked in terms of the index number, but they're just overlaid on top of each other. So we're going to try and spread them around and put them in a circle. So let's see what we can kind of do about it. First of all, I think what is a good idea for us to do is I am going to translate that, which is important so that, you know, our point of origin is there. Otherwise, it's going to be cumulative, and that's not what we want. It's the main one here. Okay. And then, so we've actually said 0, 0 because we have put the translate function out of it, right? So that's one thing. Also, because if we don't want anything to accumulate, we will use our push and pop functions, right? So that's important for us to remember because we are within the for loop and we don't want certain things to be accumulated. We are setting things up for it now, right? And then here, okay, so what's happening is that first of all, this is at the center right now, right? Think about it in terms of the circle. We'll have to figure out how big we want the circle to be. And then if you think about it from the center point, of course, we need some kind of radius to define that, right? Remember? So first of all, we're going to move, and then depending on whatever that thing is. So let's call it right now, let R be 100. Maybe this might be a small one, but we can figure that out later if it's the radius is small. And then here, what we can do is we will translate the text or our object because we are moving it on the x-axis for now, right? So I'm going to use that, and then I'll keep the y as 0. So you can see that it has shifted. One more thing that we need to do is we will have to translate it a little bit. Not translated, we have already translated it. I mean to say we need to kind of rotate it so that, you know, it kind of goes there and then it starts rotating. So before I kind of do that, I think a good idea, wait just a second, is make our lives easier by calling it out in degrees. Okay, so whatever the value we are going to be putting in our rotate function, we won't have to worry about it because it's already in degrees. So let's rotate this for now 90 degrees. Okay, So now it's there, and then we can kind of start spreading it around. Since we want the spread to be a bit cumulative, I'm going to come out of our push and pop function. You can keep watch it like that. If I do 10, you can see how this is. If I do 20, so it's going to be a bit more cumulative each time it kind of appears, right? So maybe for now, let's just keep it a bit smaller and we can kind of rearrange it. One more thing that if you notice is that, remember how the circle kind of works in our P5, right? If this is the center point, it kind of moves from here like a 3 o'clock sort of angle, and then it starts to rotate coming all the way to 360 degrees, right? But this is not how we kind of, this is not visually okay to us, just because, you know, in terms of English language, we write from left to right, right? So that means that we'll need to offset it a little bit here. And for that, what we can do is let's rotate the canvas here by 180 degrees, right? So what has started happening is, okay, if you want to spread it out and see that, you know, it starts from this point and then it can kind of go around it. So what this is happening is, depending on whatever the value I'm putting it in here in the rotate function, that's how it's kind of spreading close or far apart. But imagine if I had to not worry about putting a hard-coded number. All I wanted to do was, depending on whatever the number of the characters are within our object here, they get spread out into the full circle, right? So for that, what we can do is, I think a good idea would be, let's call it here, let max angle be 360, right? Like we know full circle is 360 divided by whatever the length of this object is, right? And then what we can do here is we are going to use this angle here. Okay, so now this is kind of spread out. If you feel that these are closer, it's just because each letter has been spread out like that. Of course, there's a space. Imagine if I had put another space after exclamation mark, you would see it differently, right? So that is one thing. The other thing that we can kind of work around is, let's say if we want to make this, so we've kind of made it in terms of like a circle, but what if we want to make it interactive, right? So imagine, based on the position of our mouse X, if I move it from left to right, these should appear in circle or not. So if we want to do that, that means that, again, we need to use our friend, which is basically our map function. And we're going to map our mouse X's position to how the angle gets created, right? So it's going to appear if it's 0, and then it's going to gradually, you know, make the whole circle. So that means that A, we know that we are working with mouse X, which is going to be mapped. We know that we are working with the angle here. So what we will do is, in this case, let's create another variable within which we will put our map function inside. So what are the parameters? We know that we are working with mouse X. We know that we are going between 0 and all the way to the width of the canvas. And then we are working with the angle. So angle starting with 0 and all the way. So we're going to use max angle here, because that way what is happening is that it's going to be a bit dynamic, and we don't have to worry about anything that kind of changes in terms of the length of the angle, length of the string object, right? So here, instead of the max angle, I'm going to replace this with angle. Okay, so now you see all of the characters are there, but based on the position of my mouse, it's going to appear big or small, not appear big or small, but it's going to complete the circle. So let's keep it at that for now. Let's do this so that it's just much more cleaner. Okay. All right, so this sort of works, right? So what we have done is we have made it a bit more dynamic. We have added interactivity in it as well. And we have kind of played with different sort of text as well. What more that we can add to this one is maybe let's just add some sort of color to it, right? So if we want all of these characters to become, if we want to fill the text with color, right? What do we need to do? First of all, we know that this is an object. Maybe a good idea would be to pick some colors up. So if you remember here, this website that we had previously kind of talked about, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export any kind of palette. If you remember, they make it very easy for us to use it. We're going to go back. I'll come here and then I'm going to create an array, right? We have worked with arrays, so we know that pretty well. But don't forget to add this hashtag, because that's how your code will identify all the hexadecimal colors. Okay, so now that we have our palette, like our color palette that we need to fill in, we have in total, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However many we have, we know that these number of colors are actually less than the number of characters that we have in our message, right? So maybe what we need to do is, again, we now need to map our colors and our message length so that, based on that, it can really take on the whole spectrum and we don't have to worry about it. It will kind of do the math for us. So this time what we will do is basically here, let's try to create another index, right? So since we've already used I, maybe a good idea is to use another variable, and then we are going to use our map function inside, okay? So what we are mapping is based on whatever the index here is. So 0 and then message.length, right, -1 because it's starting from index 0. And then we are going to map it to our length of our palette. Okay, and this one also -1 as well. Okay, so what we can do then here is that we can fill the palette color, and within this we will use the index, right? So in this case it's not an I because we've called our variable color index, so we are going to fill it with color index inside. So now what has happened is, if we can see here, is that we only see the first character and we only see the sort of first color. What happens here in this case is that the map functions, because it's kind of mapping all the way from 0 to whatever the maxed out range is, it takes up decimal points as well. So it is really mapping not just whole numbers, but also doing a gradual sort of mapping, including decimal numbers. However, when it comes to index, if you notice, in terms of arrays, like all our index numbers are whole numbers, they're integers, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are not 0 and then 0.5 and then. So it's kind of a broken link at this point in time. To resolve this issue, what we will do is we will actually get this variable, right, which has been already mapped. But right now, the value that we are getting here is in decimal numbers. So what we will do is here, and I've not copied the whole thing. Here, what we will use another function, which is called floor. What it does, it gets rid of the decimal point, and we are going to put it inside. So what we are saying is whatever value that you're getting in the map function, let's say it's getting 2 and then 2.5 and then 3 and then 3.5, whatever it is, just make sure that they're all whole numbers and get rid of the decimal points wherever you see, and then use that as the index value to fill those. So now if you see, they're kind of all working for us again. Okay, so this is something to remember, that map has float numbers, which are decimal points. We can have a workaround that to get rid of it and use those whole numbers as our index numbers. Okay, so now we have done is we've played around with objects, strings. We have kind of, added color to them, so we know that we can kind of work with colors. what we can do is, let's imagine if you wanted to actually change the font type. What if you didn't want this basic font type? So one of the easier way to kind of work around this is, let's say if I say in this one here inside, I call it Georgia, right? That's the font type. And now the font has changed. I mean, you don't have to put it in the setup function. If you put it, that's fine too. For now, instead of repeatedly doing it, because it's okay, you need it only once. If you do that, that means that, you know, you can change it. And of course, there are a few more like there. However, when it comes to coding, here in this one, and I've put it, Georgia it is something that it understands, and you can see it here is because Georgia in this case is a web safe font. So web safe fonts are basically the fonts which are understood and used across multiple different kind of systems, right? So it's a very limited number of fonts that are, you know, web safe. However, let's say if you wanted to kind of play around with a unique font of your choice, we also have a workaround that too. So what we can do is, first of all, I'm going to comment this out and let's go back to whatever it was before. We are going to make use of another object, which is called P5 font. And we are going to we're going to use it. Okay, so first of all, let's add, in fact, I don't need this XS10. I'm going to create font, a variable. And in this font, I will be assigning a value, right? Like, remember, that's what we do. We create a variable and then we put some kind of value. So in this font, what I need to do is I need to load a font. So we have a function which is called load font. And the load font parameters expects the name of the file that you're going to be uploading. Okay. So what that means is that because it's a font type that I want of my choice. In this case, you can always actually go back to Google and see some kind of free fonts available. I have downloaded one and I have put it here in asset folder. And this is a very important thing for you to remember. Any kind of media that we are working with and we are bringing it to our code, the file organization is important. We're going to put it in asset folder, right? Here, if you can see, I have already put it inside and I'll tell you how we can do it. So I've downloaded this file called Minecraft. Well, that's the font type. And this is a TTF format, which is a true type font, right? So you can either go and upload your asset from your desktop, or you can literally drag and drop like any other online folder that works. If I zoom it in, if you guys can see that now I have a web URL, like a URL. What that means is, first of all, I'm copying it for my use, but what that means is that this now resides on a server, on a glitch server that we can access and use, right? This method is specific to our glitch program that we are working with, because that's how it works. Imagine if you were using any kind of like a local coding editor like an Atom or Sublime or something like that. That might be a different way of actually putting it. In load font, then in that case, you will have to put the actual file path. That means, let's say, first of all, making sure that your file folder organization is important, but you will, let's say, then say, okay, it's an assets folder, and then comment, and then whatever the name of the file is. In my case, it's minecraft.ttf, etc. However, in our case here on Glitch, since everything is happening online, what I have only done is I uploaded my asset here. I can copy my URL from here, which already now resides on the server. What I will do is I'm going to come here within this. I'm going to put it in double quotes here. Okay, so what I've done is I've just added a URL for this to work with. And now here, instead of actually, instead, I think it's a good idea. I am going to call the text font function, and I'm going to use the font inside this one. Okay. So what that happens is, now that I've called it, if you can see, the font has changed. It's not that one anymore. The by default sans serif one that was, right? Okay, so one thing that you will need to remember is when we're working with any kind of assets, including images or sound files, etc., that would come later on. But in this case, if you're working with the font file, it's important for us to ensure that those files are loaded before the sketch is running. So for that one, there is a separate function, which is called function preload. And I have to spell it right. Otherwise, of course, as you know, it won't work. Function preload. So what it does is that it needs to, first of all, come before the setup. And it will help load the media before the sketch is run. So if you see, what I've done is I've just moved the whole font thing where the file is being loaded. And I have left this here. Okay, so I'm gonna, I think this is working. So I'm just gonna add here that this needs to, this runs before setup. So the file is loaded before the sketch runs, okay? And this is a good practice to ensure that you're kind of doing that. So wherever we are loading any kind of font or image, etc., we will put them in our preload function, which comes before our setup function, okay? So now it seems like we have, just to wrap it up, what we have kind of worked with. Before I kind of do that, if you notice one thing, I may not have said so explicitly, but you know, we have worked with arrays before. And if you notice, and we've also played around with property of arrays as well. So they have their own kind of properties and methods. But if you notice that we have been using the dot syntax structure for that as well, and we have been working with the length of the array as well. So this array is also basically an object. So it's not like we haven't been working with it. It's just that we weren't kind of quite aware of it. We are just trying to gather more of our knowledge for specific objects and how can we kind of work with them. So just to quickly wrap it up, in this one, we have worked with objects, specifically strings. We were able to make it a bit more dynamic and also add some kind of interaction. We have worked with another object, which is the P5 font object. So if you can come here, you would notice it's a P5 is a, this font is a P5 object. It has limited methods, etc., but they're there. So yeah, we were able to add color to our text. We were able to interact with it, and we were able to change font depending on whichever one you please. So thank you. I'm going to see you in the next video.